For over 100 years, the National Park Service has maintained and protected some of America's greatest treasures. Since its founding in 1916, the service has enjoyed broad support from the public as well as elected officials from both parties. Recently, however, the Trump administration has turned on the service for what it alleges are attempts to undermine the president. But its moves to silence the National Park Service may have inadvertently made park employees early leaders in the resistance to the new president. Was the National Park Service attempting to provoke Trump with its social media, or was it simply following a course set long before? And is the current president's animosity towards the parks an entirely new development, or have we seen similar moments in the past? In this episode of The Road to Now, we speak with former National Park Service Director John Jarvis to find out.
I'm Bob Crawford.
And I'm Ben Sawyer, and this is The Road to Now.
Well, Ben, we are a week into the Trump presidency, and I think anyone who thought he was going to pivot or change his behavior or become presidential or stop tweeting or stop acting like a 2-year-old is seeing that Trump is Trump, and he's not going to change.
Yeah, I think this makes us go back on the whole saying after the election was that conservatives took Trump seriously but not literally, and liberals took him literally but not seriously. I think the lesson now is that we all need to take him both seriously and literally, and I think that we are seeing that start to happen. And the last week has been a really big week in terms of what he's tried to do to reshape the country. And I think a lot of people felt dark this last week seeing these things happen. But as dark as it gets, the sun rises. And right now we're looking at the response is beginning to build. And this is the thing we hope you guys remember is that, a lot of us are worried about these policies. The historic greatness of the United States is that it's been a place where refugees could come and go from fear to being great. It's a place where we have these amazing parks, and these things feel as if they're under attack. But we're already seeing that the institutions in this country are going to respond. And today's interview is part and parcel of that. It is evidence of this. And you'll see, I think, as time go on, that there are a lot of us and that we are stronger than anyone ever thought.
That's exactly right, Ben. And we're not going to go through the laundry list of things that happened this week, and all the executive orders and all the policy changes and all the tweets. We're not going to go through all that. We don't want to take that much time. We want to get to the interview. But we do want to stress 2 points. One, when we are critical of the Trump administration, it is not because we are being partisan in any way. We believe that the actions of the Trump administration in the first week have shown that they are beyond the pale. And this is beyond liberal conservative paradigm. This is something that is completely foreign to the way our government has worked pretty much since its inception. The other thing we'd like to stress is call your representatives, call your congressmen, call your senators, call them daily. If there's something in the administration that makes you uncomfortable, let them know. They work for us.
That's right.
And they are really the only bulwark against him. The Congress is the legislative branch right now is our strongest bulwark against what the Trump administration is doing in terms of overreaching their authority in many ways.
That's right. And I know people, when you say things like call your senator, call your representatives, they kind of think those things go unheard. But I've had students who have worked for members of Congress before and have come back and told their fellow students they pay attention to these things. You need to understand that every letter that goes there, it comes to to your elected official in some way, shape, or form. And the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so let's get greased.
I've spoken to the people who answer the phones for congressional offices, and they are keeping a tally. So the main thing is you need to call your congressman or your senator because they're going to ask you your zip code. They're going to ask you where you live, and that's what matters.
Right.
So if you live in a certain zip code and a lot of people are calling about a particular issue, that is, especially for a congressman, that is going to alert them that this is an issue they need to take seriously.
That's right. And speaking of which, today we have a representative or a former official from one of the agencies that most recently had trouble, the National Park Service. And today's guest is former director. He was director of the National Park Service until January 3rd. So very recently, his replacement is right now being considered by the Trump administration. But we have John Jarvis, almost 40 years in the National Park Service. And unlike current officials, Mr. Jarvis could be frank, and I think the story he tells here is one to be hopeful about.
And Mr. Jarvis isn't just a former official. The National Park Service has been was established in 1916. It's been around for 100. It's going on its 101st year. And Mr. Jarvis was with the National Park Service for over 40 years. So we
Yeah.
have a man who has seen great changes in the National Park Service, and it's a part of him. It's a part of who he is.
It is. And the National Park Service is some of the best of who we are as a country. And so, guys, stay positive, keep that chin up, and enjoy this interview with John Jarvis.
John Jarvis, welcome to the Road to Now.
Well, thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah, we've been trying to get you on the show for at least the past month and a half, and it's really great that you're here with us today because the National Park Service is front and center in the news since the Trump administration has placed a gag order on the social media feeds of the National Park Service, the EPA, and other government agencies. This stems from a tweet that the Badlands National Park Twitter account put out the other day that stated, "Today, the amount of carbon dioxide is higher than at any time in the last 650,000 years. Hashtag climate." And this gag order has spawned a at alt US Nat Park Service Twitter handle that claims that they are the resistance. Their bio reads, "The unofficial resistance team of the U.S. National Park Service, not taxpayer subsidized, come for rugged scenery, fossil beds, and 89 million acres of landscape." Would love to get your opinion on everything that's going on right now between the federal government or the executive branch and the National Park Service. And have you seen any tension like this in your 30 years of service with the National Park Service?
Yes, actually, I have some experience in the past on this, and that's 40 years, not 30 years.
Thank
That's
you
40
for the
years with the
correction.
National Park Service. And I retired in January from being the director for the last 7 years, and spent much of my career in the field. And one of the issues that I worked on a lot was climate change. Working with scientists and my field staff, monitoring glaciers and snowpack in the Sierras and others. So, and over the last 7 years, in particular, when I was director, we stood up a whole team to focus on climate change, particularly in the parks that are highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, like Glacier National Park in particular, but a lot of our parks in the alpine regions are seeing receding glaciers. In the Sierras, we're seeing fires burn much longer and much hotter. Obviously, drought, storm surge, sea level rise affecting our coastal parks as well. So we were in the process of documenting all of that impacts to parks, and also as it relates to the social media side, learning how to communicate, how to talk about climate change, because it's a complicated issue that a lot of people don't really understand. And the Park Service serves in a very important way to the American people. We are a sort of a trusted communicator about complex issues. We talk about things like civil rights at our parks that were established specifically to tell the story of the Selma to Montgomery March, or The work of Dr. Martin Luther King, the Ebenezer Baptist Church, Martin Luther King National Historic Site in Atlanta is a Park Service site. So what's interesting to me is you can't manage a place that was a center of civil rights movement without talking about civil rights. So nor could you manage a place like Glacier National Park without talking about receding glaciers and the impacts of climate change. So in many ways, this is our job. It's our mission. It's our responsibility to communicate complex issues to the American people. And social media is a relatively new way to do that. And we've been taking advantage of that over many years. And most specifically recently, all the parks are running some sort of Twitter accounts or other social media accounts to get the word out. And the new administration obviously has somewhat a different policy view about climate change, but we also experienced this under George W. Bush when he came in as president, and at the same time, we're also kind of a similar uh, expression of the new administration to stop talking about climate change. This one's a little different, but not unfamiliar.
So I think this is interesting because I think from the perspective of those from Donald Trump at least, and perhaps those on who support him, they saw these tweets about climate change as somewhat aimed at him. But you're saying this is not at all the case, that the National Park Service has been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a whole team that was established specifically to work in sort of four categories on climate change, and they've been in place for some time. We work on climate adaptation. As a matter of fact, each of our national parks that are going through a management planning process have to incorporate the anticipated effects of climate change. So where we place facilities in the Everglades, and where we do facilities in our coastal parks like Assateague, or even the parks in New York Harbor, which were impacted by Hurricane Sandy. So we have a standard for where we put our utilities in these buildings based on anticipated sea level rise. That's a standard sort of adaptation strategy in all of the national parks. And then we have a communications strategy about training our employees how to talk about climate change without pointing fingers at any particular industry, just say that we are observing changes to the climate in these national parks, and we do believe it is scientifically based and driven by human activities, increase in carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And then we also, have a big, strong scientific program with monitoring these activities. And then we also have a mitigation program where we're attempting to reduce our own carbon footprint through design of facilities, energy use and the like. So we've been doing this for at least a decade, pretty intensively. And so I think the distinction I want to make here is that I think the administration somehow feels that the Park Service is talking about climate change is a policy discussion, and we don't view climate change as a policy issue. What you do about climate change is a policy issue. How the administration may address climate change, whether it's increased in the development of renewables or a greater emphasis on fossil fuels, all of those kinds of things, how we address it internationally, that's policy. The impact into parks is observation, scientifically based. That's not policy. That's just what we do and what we believe is our responsibility, and also communicating that to the public. That's what we do.
I think what's amazing about that is that a lot of people don't understand. At least I didn't understand the complexity of what the National Park Service does and what it provides people. I think it's got the same thing with NASA, where people think NASA just sends rockets into space, but it does way more than that. And so it's very interesting to talk about that and understand this isn't a divergence. This is actually them going along the same path they always have. Now, my question would be, you kind of hinted at this earlier. about the relationship between the National Park Service and the executive. Because early on, when you look back at Ulysses S. Grant, when you look at Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, you see that some of the great moments in the establishment of the National Park Service come from from the activity of the executive branch. But this has not always been a positive relationship, is what you're saying? Have there been high points and low points that you've observed?
Well, sure. I would say there's been alternative emphasis areas, shall we say, from the
Right.
various executive branches. I mean, the Park Service is a part of the executive branch of the federal government. I mean, we are. Our mission comes, though, from 100 years of legislative history from the U.S. Congress, really starting in 1916 with the Organic Act, which says that we are to provide and protect and manage the national parks unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. So that's a very optimistic, forward-looking kind of mandate, and that legislation still stands. It's our operating guideline, but since 1916, there have been some reaffirmations of that mission, and even broadening of that mission. In the 1930s, Franklin Roosevelt moved all of the domestic battlefields, the Civil War and Revolutionary War battlefields that were in the United States that were at the time under the War Department, and moved them over to the National Park Service. And with a stroke of the pen, the president gave us a much broader responsibility to not only to protect, the classic big Western, large landscape national parks like the Grand Canyon and Yosemite and Yellowstone, but these places, these sort of sacred ground places of the Civil War and the Revolutionary War, and as a result, the Park Service brought on, scholars, historians, archaeologists, to understand not only, in, let's say, the Civil War, not only the, heroics and, bore size of the cannon, but, what was the cause of the Civil War, and what is its relationship to race relations today, from Civil War to civil rights, and Congress has given us places like the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Site, or Manzanar, which is we now
right.
have 4 units of the National Park System that are related to the confinement of Japanese Americans during World War II. And so, while we obviously work for the president, our mission doesn't change with each administration, and they may have a slightly different emphasis for focus, while they're in power. But you can't just wipe away 100 years of history with the Park Service.
Yes, it's something I love about the National Park Service and the national parks that I've been to. They embrace the good and the bad, and the good, the
Oh,
bad,
yes.
and the ugly of American history, which we we can't we can't love it all because some of it's very ugly, but we need to embrace it because it's our collective experience. John, I just want to get you on the record real quick about at all U.S. Natural Park Service Twitter handle. Do you sanction them, support them? What's your opinion of what they're doing?
Well, I've only looked at it a couple of times, and I honestly don't know, who's running it, who's contributing to it. Um, and it could be employees, it could be volunteers. I mean, the Park Service is. Let me give you just a couple of stats. I mean, we have about 20,000 employees that are permanent, and then we hire 8,000 or so summer seasonals, and we have over 400,000 volunteers that work in the national parks with us. And then we have probably an equivalent number of partner organizations that work with us in the field. Some of them commercial, like our concessioners, guides and outfitters, friends groups, cooperating associations. So it's a very large, complicated organization that carries the responsibility. And Park Service people, but not only our own employees, but people that work with us, are very, very passionate. They're very mission driven. They take that mission as a core value, and most of them spend their entire lives working either in the service or adjacent to the service, with the service, about these places, and some, are focused on science and on the management of natural resources. Some focused on cultural resources and how you manage these places, and some, how you tell these stories. And so, I don't think there's um, a any way to sort of suppress that voice. The voice is going to come out around the edges, or in the middle. Either way, it's going to come out
So
because of that passion.
it sounds like you don't particularly love what's going on right now with the Trump administration and these government agencies, but you kind of, your hair's not on fire about it. You're kind of like, well, we've kind of seen this movie before. It's been it's to be expected when certain administrations take office. How do you kind of see this thing working out? Is it gonna just kind of settle in a couple months where there will be some cooperation as far as what still allowing to have climate change data on the EPA website, and the National Park Service being able to give people's heads up about what's going on at Glacier National Park. Do you feel like this is going to kind of settle down in a little bit?
Well, I sure hope so. I think we're entering into some unpredictable waters here, but I hope it settles down a little bit. I mean, I think any incoming administration struggles a bit, and this one, I think, in particular, is struggling because they weren't really prepared to take over, and putting their teams together. They aren't bringing in necessarily a lot of people that have had a lot of experience working in the executive branch with the federal government, and so there's some rough transitions going on, and I think it will settle down a bit, and I think that the other thing that they're learning about the Park Service in particular is the Park Service is a very large constituency. I mean, we hosted 305 million visitors last year.
Wow.
Um, and let me put that in perspective. That is more than all of the national football, all of national baseball, all of national basketball, NASCAR, and soccer combined, and Disney. We'll throw Disney in there too. So that's more than all of those combined actually visited a national park last year, and so that group is hardly one political spectrum. It's a broad political spectrum, and they love their national parks, and so there's no political gain for any administration to whoop up on the Park Service. Doesn't they're not going to get any good out of that. So what they need to do is to figure out how they can support the work of the National Park Service, because the Park Service reflects, in many ways, the very best of the values of the nation, and it hopefully they'll learn that fairly quickly.
I had the pleasure of meeting you personally at the 2014 National Christmas Tree Lighting in DC.
Yeah, I remember.
It
I
was
remember.
it was a real honor and a pleasure to meet you. And you guys were getting ready for the Centennial, and you told me, we're trying to rebrand a little bit. We're working with some ad agencies, and I began to see these really stunning, dynamic national park billboards on the highways. And then I'd go to REI, and they'd have national park T-shirts and mugs, and I kept thinking, man, John was right. They've done an amazing job. It paid off. How did the Centennial celebration go for you guys?
I think it went really, really great. We did a lot of things. let's say, out of the box that we hadn't really tried before. We launched this Find Your Park campaign, really a love letter to the American people, an invitation to come and find their park, find that place that directly relates to them. And we had um, enormous support from our foundation, and we had sponsorships from corporate America and from private individuals. Um, we raised about $340 million to support projects in the national parks from a variety of sources. The Find Your Park campaign passed 18 billion media impressions. Um, the merchandise, like you mentioned from REI, exceeded all expectations in terms of sales. We branded and marketed the Find Your Park logo, with a variety of the outdoor retailers, and the social media interest, visitation. We set new records in terms of visitation. I think we reached out and met new audiences and the folks that maybe had not experienced national parks in the past, and we had a partnership with a number of celebrities who produced videos for us. People like Bill Nye, the Science Guy, and and a bunch of others. I think it was a great year, and I think that our real goal was to reconnect with the American people, those that already knew us and maybe had lost a little contact, and to really connect with the next generation, so that they would be supporters and advocates, and we're going to need them as we go into this bit of rough waters.
I was recently watching the Ken Burns documentary on the national parks. A pretty, like most of his things, is a pretty incredible piece. And he pointed out something that I think relates to what we're talking about here, which is that historically there has always been some sense of a tension between the two goals of the National Park Service, which are, one, to preserve the land, and two, to make the land and the sites as accessible as possible to the general public. What steps have you taken to make sure that you can make this, you encourage people to come, people have access to it, but at the same time making sure the places stay, the places we want to see?
It's a great question, and it is a perennial, a hardy perennial question that
Right.
that is out there. My own experience with this, and having worked in very popular parks, like I was the superintendent of Mount Rainier National Park, that gets a lot of visitors that come to just specific areas, and you can you can see some of their direct impact. It can be crowded at times, and certainly I was in Yellowstone in August, and driving through some of the valleys. There were bison jams and bear jams. With the traffic backed up for
Right.
a mile or so. And But I strongly feel that the public use of the national parks is an operational issue. It is a timing, it's a quantity, it's a quality of experience issue, but it is not really a issue that impacts the integrity of the park. Issues like climate change or mercury transport from coal plants in China, uh, boundary development by fracking, um, migratory uh, non-native species that are being pushed as a result of climate change, or new species that have been introduced to the country, things like cheatgrass or buffalo grass, having changing the overall ecological dynamics. These are the real impactful long-term concerns I have for the national parks, not public use. And I think that the public, we there's a term that was used a lot in the '60s that drives me crazy, and I almost refuse to use it, but it was said loving the parks to death, and I have a real problem with that because you know, if they love the park, then they're going to support the park and they're going to protect the park. And that love, we know actually scientifically, is generated by actually going there. It's
Right.
in all due respect to our wonderful smartphones, you can't really look at the Grand Canyon on your smartphone and say, "Wow, I've been to the Grand Canyon now."
Yeah.
Right? Uh, it just doesn't work like that. Um, and so inviting the public to these places so that they can have a powerful transformative experience converts that experience into advocacy and into support constituency. And so I the fact that places are sometimes a little overwhelmed with the public is an operational issue. It means the Park Service has to work on transportation systems, better social media for timing of when you come, and how you organize your visit, where you go in the park. There are, all too often people all want to go to the same place at the same time, rather than a little better redistribution. And we've built infrastructure in the parks specifically to allow a lot of use without direct impact. Now we've made some mistakes in our 100-year history, and we've tried to fix some of that. Like in Sequoia National Park, we finally pulled all the development out of the giant sequoias and pulled it back. And we're doing the same thing at Yosemite at the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias. We're pulling all the roads back out of the grove so that the forest can recover, but the public can still use it on elevated boardwalks. So we know how to manage these sites so the public can use them. We are, I would say, a bit cash strapped to accomplish that goal, and we would certainly hope that if this administration decides to have a infrastructure initiative, that they would be generous to the National Park Service to help us, fix some of these problems that are exacerbated by high volumes of public.
And this goes into, I think, another question and something that's, I think, has been looming historically. I mean, you can take this back to Milton Friedman, I think, in the 1970s, which is this concept that the public would better be served if the parks were privatized, and that the problem is that the government's involved, and that in fact that impedes the market. And if people wanted to go see the parks, they would go see the parks and pay for it on their own. But if people, if it made more financial sense to privatize it and sell tracks off to developers, that would be better. What do you think the best arguments are? If I would assume that you would disagree with that, but
Yeah, that'd be a pretty good assumption. I would say I vehemently disagree with Mr. Friedman's assertion about that. That's a classic old story that somehow the private sector, anything's worth is determined by the public's willingness to pay.
right.
And if the public is not willing to pay, then therefore it should not exist. Well, I'd hate if we applied that to a lot of things that we consider American values. Um, so, let's just look at the U.S. in general. So the vast majority of public lands, or the entire, let's just take the entire United States, continental United States. About half of the United States is in agriculture. About 50% of the land base is in some form of agriculture. And then the vast majority, the rest of that, is in some form of private ownership. Um, and so only about 30% of the nation is in public ownership, and that is in the four land management agencies, not counting defense and the military bases, but the Forest Service, the BLM, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Park Service. And the Park Service is the smallest of those agencies, Forest Service and BLM being much larger, and they manage for multiple use: the oil and gas, gravel, timber, fiber, grazing. So they're not really managed for preservation like the Park Service. So we're this relatively small agency with a small subset of lands that are specifically set aside uh, for future generations. If you applied a pure economic model to that, let's just say those future generations might not be assured that these parks would be there for them, um, because if they're sold off or subdivided or could exist only through some sort of revenue generation, then I think that that would be a significant loss to these places, and a devaluation of their true economic potential. We know, just talking economically, that for every dollar invested in the national parks from the federal government, there is $4 return in the local economy and $10 in the national economy. And there was also recently, and you can look this up, Harvard University did a economics evaluation of the national parks just this past year. It was part of our Centennial effort, and they did what's called a willingness to pay survey of the American people, and it's actually pretty extraordinary what the American public would be willing to have their taxes increased by in order to preserve the national parks. Right now, the American taxpayer pays uh, 1/2 of 1 cent of their taxes go to support the National Park Service. Um, and so they're all willing to pay considerably more. You can look that research project up. But we do work with the private sector. Food and beverage, lodging, guides and outfitters are all run by private sector within the Park Service. So they generate revenue for the local economies and for the broader economy. But I am a strong believer that there are inherently government responsibilities, and I think the management protection of the national parks is inherently government responsibility.
And we saw the economic impact recently during the government shutdown a few years ago, where the parks were shut down for a few days, and it was terrible for the economy in the surrounding area.
Yeah, and I was in the middle of that, and governors were begging us to reopen because of the potential impact to these gateway communities around the national parks. And ultimately, many governors actually gave us money to reopen the national parks in places like Utah and others, so that they could restore that local economy.
We all kind of think of Theodore Roosevelt as being like the father of the national park system in a lot of ways. What in your time at the national park system? What administration was the friendliest to the National Park Service?
Well, so clearly, President Carter, Jimmy Carter, used his powers under the Antiquities Act to establish the parks in Alaska, and sort of forcing the hand of Congress to pass legislation, which resulted in the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, and NILCA, established many of the units and more than doubled the size of the National Park Service with the Alaska parks. Um, During Bill Clinton's time in office, there was good support for the National Park Service. Even during George W. Bush's administration, in particular, Laura Bush is a huge park fan. She traveled and visited the national parks every year. We hosted her in a variety of national parks and got to know her very well. And actually, George W. used the Antiquities Act himself to expand the national park system and add some new units as well. And then this most recent administration, of course, under President Obama, he was very, very supportive of the National Park Service and helped us with initiatives like Every Kid in a Park, granting a free pass to every fourth grader in the nation and for them and their family for a year, as well as using his authority under the Antiquities Act to add a number of new units to the system, particularly in the sort of civil rights part of our story, our history.
So this in a time of divisiveness and political, hardcore political partisanship, it seems like America's love for our national parks is something that we have in common.
Absolutely. And I think it could be used even more strategically. Having hosted a number of congressional delegations to national parks that were from both sides of the aisle, we've had great fun.
Right.
You get Republicans and Democrats to go stand in Gettysburg and talk about the Civil War, or to stand on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. I think DC is a tough town, and there's a lot of political division that occurs inside the Beltway. But I think when we get folks out on the ground, a lot of that animosity sort of falls away, and we start reminding ourselves that we're all Americans, and we should be proud of our history, and we're proud of our legacy, and proud of the national park system.
In the history of the Park Service, and I know you know the history well. You're part of almost half the history of the Park Service, which is amazing. Um, do you have any great stories, about the history of the parks that you'd like to share? Any stories that just, that you feel like encapsulate the mission?
From my own personal experience, I can talk about a few things that I worked on that I think are sort of exemplify how the Park Service is has a sort of dogged determination to accomplish big things, and we stick with it. And then also that and I guess this relates back to your beginning of our discussion. We have a certain fearlessness in the Park Service that is sort of a little bit about who we are. Um, so I'll start with one in sort of dogged determination, and that was um, in Olympic National Park up on the Washington State on the Olympic Peninsula. There were two dams that were built over 100 years ago that block the flow of the Elwha River. And the Elwha River, 70 miles of the river is inside the park, and then it runs for about 5 miles out of the park into the Strait of Juan de Fuca on the northern side of the Olympic Peninsula. And right at the mouth of the river, there is an Indian tribe, the Lower Elwha Clallam tribe, and the Elwha River is their birthplace. It is they've been there for millennia, and they live off of the salmon. Well, these two dams blocked the upstream migration completely of the salmon, and these dams were built 100 years ago. They're hydroelectric dams, and the Park Service about 30 years ago decided we were going to take them down. And I actually was a little bit involved in that. I know very close friends of mine were the superintendent there at the time, and said basically made an announcement, put out a press release that we're going to take the dams down. Of course, stirred up all kinds of political dust out there. This is a town that is a rural timber town. And we're talking even before spotted owl days, and through the work with Congress, with the work with the tribes, with a variety of members of the House and the Senate, many changes in administration over the last 30 years, we took those dams down. And today, salmon and steelhead are back in the national park, 70 miles upstream into the headwaters. The tribe has the capability of re-establishing their origin site and harvesting the salmon. Community benefits economically, um, and the ecology of that whole system has been restored. And it took 17 different appropriations with Congress. It took multiple governors, multiple presidents, secretaries of interior, superintendents, and me and a handful of other people have dogged this thing for 30 years, and actually pulled it off. And it set a bar that people are now talking. Well, what about dams on the Klamath River, or in the Penobscot, or in other parts of the country? Maybe we can take these dams down, based on the example that the Park Service. It's the largest dam removal in the history of the U.S. So I think I was kind of proud of that goal, not for me personally, but for the service, and a willingness to take on something as complicated as that and figure out how to pull it off. And
That's
then,
amazing.
yeah, and then another story. So just in 2015, we were coming out of the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, and we had very specifically decided that this time when we talked about the Civil War, we were going to talk about slavery, and we put together a series of scholarly articles and books and papers and lectures around slavery as the cause of the Civil War, not states' rights or the War of Northern Aggression or that little unpleasantness or however you want to characterize it was, or that it was all about bore size and charges across cornfields. It was about slavery and the expansion of slavery, and that when we talk about openly about slavery and then Reconstruction and lynchings, and then we bring it right into the civil rights movement and right into the anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March. And so, obviously, with an African American president, we were able to get the president involved, and he came down. And on the actual anniversary, we did a march across the Selma, the Edmund Pettus Bridge from Selma to Montgomery. But more important than that, and what that was very important, but the week after of all of that, we brought in about 150 high school students, some of them from Ferguson, Missouri, and other troubled parts of the nation: Chicago, Detroit, New York, Washington, D.C., other inner city kids. And we put them on buses, and we brought them through Washington, D.C. I actually met with a bunch of them here in the district. We took them through some Civil War battlefields, and then we took them to Selma. And they walked the 54 miles from Selma to Montgomery on the actual route over a period of a week.
Wow.
And they did about 8 miles a day. And each evening, we brought them back to an area along the route, which is known as Tent City. It's a part of the Park Service. And it was where African Americans, after they marched in 1965, most of them were kicked out of their homes, and a lot of them were renters, and they had to live in tents for years after that in this one area between Selma and Montgomery. And so we put up tents, and we put these 150 high school kids in these tents, and of course we stood up wireless for them, and and then each night we had one of the original freedom walkers, one of the original foot soldiers of the original Selma March, come and talk to them and relate their experience from the civil rights era right into Black Lives Matter, right into contemporary issues of relationships in America today. And what was really, and then I have met with a couple of these groups of kids. I was out in Cleveland, and I was talking to a group of high school kids, all black kids, and one of them had been on the march, and the rest of them had not. And and I had met the young man that had been on the march before, and I said, was talking to him, and I said, so how did you enjoy it? He was just going on and on about it, and I said, I looked at his friends, and I said, has he talked to you about it? And they said, he won't shut up about it. Uh, and clearly, these kids have been changed as a result of that. And I think that, to me, again, thinking back to the Park Service and what we do as an agency is we help the American people understand that the nation has very high ideals, but has not yet achieved them. We set a very high bar for ourselves, and the path to get there has had a lot of challenges, and those challenges are actual physical places on the ground that you can go and you can hear and you can experience and learn about how we got to where we are today, and maybe even apply some of those lessons to the struggles we are having with the nation today, as divided as we are about issues about immigration or civil rights or social justice or environmental justice or conservation or all of those. So I think that it's those kinds of moments that make me the proudest of the Park Service.
Both those stories you told us express how Americans depend on national parks for our connection to nature and our connection to our history.
That's right.
What can we do, all those who love the park system, what can we do to help to maintain and preserve those treasures, our birthright, really, for years to come?
Well, there are a couple things. One is visit and bring your kids, your family, your friends, and come and learn something. Come and experience the place, but also, take the time to do a ranger program or get out and hear from folks on the ground that know these stories. I mean, if you go to Gettysburg or Manassas or Antietam and you go out with a ranger, that ranger may have published a half a dozen books and have a PhD in Civil War history. Um, or if you go to Little Rock Central High School, and talk to one of the rangers there. I know at least several of the rangers. One ranger's mother was one of the Little Rock Nine. One of the rangers' father was one of the National Guardsmen. That protected the Little Rock Nine. So I mean, you're going to be talking to people that know their story, know their history, and love sharing it. So that's one. The second is really to advocate for the protection of the national parks, and that can be, there are many conservation organizations out there that serve that role in terms of advocacy. And you don't have to be a member or anything like that, but you can contribute, you can sign petitions, you can let your congressman know that if they're considering a bill that would be harmful to the Park Service or cut the budget of the Park Service, to let them know that that's not what you want. You want these places taken well care of and protected. And if you really want to get involved, you can always volunteer. And we love our volunteers, and folks come and they work behind the desk and they do trail patrol and they do search and rescue and they do natural resources and cultural resources, and we have an army, over, like I mentioned before, over 400,000 volunteers that work in the national parks. And a lot of people think all the national parks are out west, a long way away, but there are actually a lot of national parks nearby, and you can just look it up on the nps.gov website, see what's nearby.
And I've several times gone to the Stones River battlefield, which is right by, I'm a professor at Middle Tennessee State University, and right there in Murfreesboro is that battlefield. And, I teach history, and I had read about the battle and, knew the nuts and bolts. But the first time I went there and took a tour of the battlefield with one of the rangers there, my mind was blown. I've done it twice, and I want to go back again because, someone who's lived there and knows the place and can just point to you, that's where they stood, point over there, that's where they stood. It makes you understand and feel connected to that past in an amazing way.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big values of the service is our role in public education. It's an area that I put a lot of emphasis in as the director, and developing curriculum to be used by public schools and private schools and homeschools. That if you're studying, let's say, the Civil War, it's one thing to read about it in a book, and it's another to walk that ground, and realize how close they were, when they were battling, and how isolated and difficult some of these terrains were, and it's totally different. They're unforgettable after you do it on the ground.
John, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate it.
Sure. Well, thanks. Thanks for the interest, and appreciate it. So you guys take care.
All right.
Thank you. You too, sir.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on The Road to Now. Today's episode was produced by Bob Crawford, Ben Sawyer, and Ian Scotton. It was edited by Nick Corrigan, and the music was by the wonderful Paul DeFiglia. For more information about the podcast, go to www.theroadtonow.com and follow us on social media, Twitter @road_to_now, and our Facebook page as well. For Bob Crawford, I'm Dr. Ben Sawyer. Have a great day.